We are live.
Live, this is Senate Appropriations. It is March 19th. We are going through some bills that were referred to appropriations by Rule 31. And we're going to talk about S53, which is a bill about doulas. And the sponsor of the bill, or the committee reporter, isn't going to be here for a little bit, so we're going to have Ledge Counsel Jen Carvey just give us an overview of the bill. You can give us the whole overview shortly, but then mainly about the why would, what the appropriations related was.
Okay. Good afternoon, Jen Carvey from the Office of Legislative Counsel. We are looking at Senate Bill 53, an act relating to certification of community-based perinatal doulas and Medicaid coverage for doula services. So I thought it might be helpful just to start by talking about what a doula is. And so there's a number of definitions in the bill. Sort of big picture, this bill is creating a voluntary certification process, so there will still be non-certified doulas as there are now, but this certification is connected to coverage in the Medicaid program. And so probably the biggest definitions for you to know are on page 2 of the bill as introduced. A community-based doula is an individual who provides doula services to under-resourced and marginalized populations at low or no cost, often through a community-based agency. A community-based perinatal doula is a community-based doula who provides doula services to individuals during the perinatal period. A doula is a non-clinical, non-medical individual who provides direct emotional and physical support and educational and informational services to birthing persons before, during, and after labor and childbirth. And perinatal is the period of time encompassing pregnancy, childbirth, and up to 1 year postpartum. So we're talking about doulas who provide the services. Do you want me to yield to the reporter so that you can hear from her and she can go back to her committee, or you?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll make it quick. That was the only part I was going to read to you.
Okay.
So those are your different definitions, and we're talking again about community-based perinatal doulas, and the bill section 1 sets up a new certification program, voluntary certification, in the Office of Professional Regulation.
There's already an OPR for doula.
There is no doulas are not currently regulated, and you may, I can't remember if it was, I think the bill came through this committee last year as well, regarding Medicaid coverage of doulas, and there was concerns raised from the Office of from the Department of Vermont Health Access that there needed to be some sort of identification of who was qualified to be a doula before Medicaid should be paying for their services. And OPR was directed to do a sunrise review and come back with a recommendation for the most appropriate form of regulation for doulas. There's a report on the legislative website. They recommended certification, which is kind of the middle level of regulation between registration and just the least restricted and licensure.
I just misunderstood you maybe. It's both the community-based and the regular doulas, or is it only one?
We're only talking, for certification purposes, we're talking about community-based perinatal doulas, which is...
Isn't going to be a certification for the non-community?
No, and not all community-based perinatal doulas need to get certified. They only need to get certified if they want to be reimbursed by Medicaid, so serve Medicaid patients.
Okay, I get it.
So the first few sections of the bill are all about standing up the voluntary certification program by the Office of Professional Regulation. And the amendment that comes to you from Senate Health and Welfare would appropriate $25,000 from the general fund to the Office of Professional Regulation to establish the certification program. So that is the main reason, I think, the most obvious reason why this bill is in your committee. The other is that the bill does require Medicaid coverage of services provided by certified community-based perinatal doulas, and they provide their services to Medicaid beneficiaries. It would require a state plan amendment, so there would be no coverage until, unless and until Vermont received approval to amend our Medicaid state plan, approval from the federal government, to include the coverage for doula services in our Medicaid state plan. And so while the certification program takes effect July 1st of 2026, the coverage under Medicaid takes effect on the later of July 1st, 2026, or approval of the state plan amendments. And in the current federal climate, the approval is not necessarily guaranteed.
Any questions for Ledge Council? Why we have it? Okay. Senator Gould, you?
You said it right, thank you.
Yeah.
That was fabulous. Thank you so much for having me today here in Appropriations. It is exciting to be here to follow up on the doula bill from last session. As you know, I was here talking about it. I have, as I said last time I was here, I have personal experience with doulas, having been fortunate enough to be able to pay for one for myself when I had my 2 kids, with a husband who was very rarely at home, and an extended family that wasn't here. I really felt like I wanted the support, and I was very lucky to have it. Personal story is that my first birth was very long, and there was definitely pressure coming from the hospital to expedite the process. Luckily, I had a doula there who was able to recognize that I was not in distress, the baby was not in distress, we just needed more time, and I ended up having a normal birth, which, as we know, is not only great for baby and mom, but also saves tens of thousands of dollars in the system. And as someone who's on the healthcare committee, we are looking at, reform, we're looking at long-term planning to make our system more affordable, and doulas do just that. When a doula is in the room with a birthing family, there's a 20% reduction in the odds of a preterm birth, a 40% reduction in the likelihood of a cesarean section, and the broader health benefits around mental health, specifically with postpartum, is huge. We have a dearth of mental health care practitioners and beds in the state, and so if we can avoid, that kind of situation for moms who are postpartum, then it's a huge boon to the state in general and to Vermonters. So specifically cost savings, we're looking at avoiding for a preterm birth about $42,000, preventing a C-section almost $4,500. And as I said, a 35% reduction in the odds of experiencing postpartum anxiety or depression. And this was all part of some incredible testimony that we had last year in our committee. It was very, very poignant, and really encouraged us to continue with this work. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but that is what we're doing with the doula bill this time around.
Well, thank you for continuing to do your work on it. Did you take testimony from OPR that even though we need the $25,000 to get it started, that the fees that the registrants would pay for OPR work going forward?
We took testimony from OPR that was passionately in favor of this bill. So
right, I get that.
I'm just gonna leave it at that.
Where they would need more money going forward. The $25,000 is just a start.
Yeah, right.
Correct.
Yeah, I can talk about that.
And then there is a fiscal note we can ask Nolan talk about going forward. Is there any other questions for Senator Gould? Yes, Senator.
Just a quick one, not being familiar, obviously. What is a doula charge from start to finish?
That varies. And I'm not sure if, no, we don't have that in our note. I might want to call or phone a friend, but it generally is inexpensive. I think we talked about anywhere from nothing, so free services, to maybe $1,000 for the whole, from beginning to end. But I might want to get you more specific numbers.
Just curious, you threw the numbers out on the cost of the medical. I was just wondering what a doula's cost were in comparison.
Yeah, very inexpensive generally.
For the record, I want to fiscal office. Last year's bill required for Medicaid to do a report on this, and they estimated it would be about $100 per, this is for Medicaid, not for others. About $100 per visit for 12 visits, they estimate like $2,100.
I really don't want to get into the rest of my questions. I'm gonna leave it at that.
Okay, we can talk offline.
Yeah, you can talk about it. Okay, any other questions? Okay. Then we'll let you go back to your committee unless you want to stick around for any of the conversation. We'll just ask CFO Nolan to go over the fiscal note.
Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it. I will stick around.
Just wants to make sure I don't mess up.
Yeah, right.
For the record, Noel Langwell, the joint fiscal office, I feel like I should lean to this side of the
Yeah, I
table,
know, yeah.
because it's both listing a little bit.
Your side of the table, it's not all about that, it's centered on.
Oh, yeah.
So there are 4 things that I flagged in my fiscal notes, if anyone has it up, it's on the top of page 3. There are per diems. So because there's there is some kind of study, right? I should remember this. Oh yeah, to require OPR to appoint 2 certified community-based doulas to like advise. And so we estimate that there'll be some per diems, but it'll be very, very, very small. So nominal can be captured within the OPR special fund budget. Not a lot. And the second piece is the revenues. We talked about the licensure fees and across the hall. Talked about, we estimated that revenue would be about $4,500 to $7,000 for the licensure fees for the doulas. And this is the parts that impact you now. And the third one is Medicaid reimbursements and OPR appropriation. I'll start with the OPR appropriation. We heard from the Office of Professional Regulation that they do need a one-time $25,000 appropriation to cover costs of establishing the program. That includes staff time, IT costs, stakeholder outreach, and rulemaking. From then on out, once the certification's up and they start collecting revenues from the fees cover the staff time to do the work.
Okay.
Just like the other regulations, and they dip into that fund to pay for the regulatory work that they do. The last piece that's on here is Medicaid reimbursement. This doesn't have a 26 impact. This is down the road, because first we need to get a state plan amendment. Once we get the state plan amendment, the estimate is that it could cost $426,000 gross, $176,000 per year. But that's a rough estimate. That estimates a very low take up in the beginning. The cost is going to depend on the utilization of it. It's going to depend on the awareness of it, and then also doula is actually becoming certified to reimburse through Medicaid. So in the front end, it's not going to be a lot of money. In theory, it would be if awareness gets up, utilization goes up. The flip side of that is that there's been lots of studies, and whenever we do a fiscal note on something that has potential savings, there's lots of empirical evidence that talks about how doulas can actually help reduce costs. As Senator Gulick talked about, it's cheaper for someone to use a doula than to have a high, there's all kinds of studies that show that it actually can reduce costs for pregnancies. I sort of reference some of the empirical evidence, but I can't book those savings because we don't know. It's like when I do smoking cessation or some of these others, like, yes, we know it will help, and we can't book those savings until we see the savings, right? So I just sort of flag it like, yes, there will be a cost, maybe in 27, maybe in 28, depending on if and when we get a state plan amendment, and depending on what the uptake and utilization is of Medicaid beneficiaries to the program. But in the end, it may actually save the program money rather than cost.
Okay. All makes sense to me. Any questions about the fiscal note? So in some out year, this was my question. So I assume the bill requires us to make this state plan amendment.
Yes.
Who does that?
AHS.
So once the bill becomes law, they would go through the process to make
it. It directs them to apply for state plan amendment, and then we
may or may not get it.
Yeah, it depends.
But 13 other states have received this.
I think it has less to do with whether it's good and more to do with what is the current CMS administration thinking.
Right.
Especially, we found that in transition years, when there's change of presidents, things tend to lag a little bit as there's a change in staff. So there's a little bit of that too.
If that's happening at all with this person.
No comment.
Okay. Okay, any questions on this bill? I think given the Medicaid cost is something that we can't predict at this time, and $25,000 OPR thing is de minimis, or would you take that out? It seems like that's such a small amount to take out and then try to keep track of it later, that it's almost easier to keep it in than it is to try to
It's not
track.
track of it.
Yeah, I guess either way, we gotta keep track of it. It's easier to track the bill or track the $25,000, I'm not sure.
If you could answer one question for me, at what point in time does it not become de minimis?
Yeah, I know, that's what I'm wondering, is it $25,000?
That's
Set the bar
the only
someplace.
problem that you've got is it's a slippery slope.
Right, yeah.
But once we pass the bill, we need to keep track of the number.
Right.
And on the other hand, if you leave it in the bill, then as it goes to the House, there might be some changes that they make to it, so.
But
Or might not
if I may,
Yeah.
the way it usually works from here is when you pass a bill with an appropriation, we track it and it becomes part of your budget construct.
Yeah, it's
Regardless of what the
already-
House-
Regardless of what they.
Regardless of what we do, it's in our construct.
Correct.
I hadn't thought about what is the minimus at this point.
Yeah,
Per diems are de minimis.
Right, but what if the per diems are $25,000?
Well, then I would sell you the flag it. It all depends on where it comes. Sometimes we've directed like it to come out of the budget, but I don't know. In this case, I think you want to do appropriation specific for OPR because you want to make
so it
sure.
would be
Yeah.
in the big bill appropriation.
Yeah, I'd highly
Yeah.
recommend.
Be in one place. We probably better do that.
Take that.
I agree.
Okay, so I will entertain a motion to amend the bill of the.
So moved.
So we're, Senator Westman
And
is,
send it out favorably.
send her out favorably with the OPR appropriation removed.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, what you're looking to do is not approve the amendment from Health and Welfare, because that was the only amendment you had.
That's the only amendment we made to it, was to put in the request from the Secretary of State's office.
So I guess we would further amendment to
Duke
strike
it out
their
on the
amendment.
floor.
Yeah, I think I'd like to chat with the Senate Secretary's office about the best way to accomplish that.
Right, I don't want to have, saying that we're having our motion be that we don't approve of their motion. I don't think we can't address their amendment in this committee, is my understanding. Like, we can't strike that
I think
amendment.
that's true, but I think we may have to have you recommend on the floor not approving the Health and Welfare amendment. I don't think it makes sense to do an amendment. I can't.
Right, well, I think because the floor question will be, will you accept the Health and Welfare's amendment? And then they could accept our amendment, which is actually their.
Yours would be a substantial negation of their amendment
Yeah,
as well, which I
but
think is a procedural problem. So I'll
Okay.
check with the
It's a good-
Secretary's
it's a
office. I'll
question,
be back
but
to you this afternoon.
For now, our intent, we have this.
Our
motion.
intent would be, yeah,
So our clerk isn't here, so our vice clerk has to take the role. Which is our
What do we
former
vote, what's
clerk.
our motion?
our motion
Is
is
not to approve
do
the
the
Senate Health
bill,
and
No,
Welfare.
I don't
to
think you
do
have
the
that.
bill favorably without the appropriation.
Is one of the bills introduced.
It's effectively what you are voting on is the bill as introduced.
Yeah, right, so we're amending the bills introduced and this wasn't in there?
The amendment was not in the bill as introduced. The appropriation is the,
Well, what draft of the bill did Health and Welfare pass?
as
Usually,
introduced.
As introduced.
With a single well, 2 instances of amendment adding the
Are
appropriation.
they amendments or are they just, it's
It's not a
the,
strike
it's
all.
the committee's amendment?
It's not a strike, it's the committee's amendment, but it is not a strike all. It is just 2 instances of amendment to put in a section on the appropriation and then fix the effective dates.
So we're going to, the bills introduced then.
Right, but the bill introduced didn't have the appropriations yet, they're saying. So we could approve the bill as introduced, and then if their amendment passes, we would have to get up and make another amendment. That seems kind of weird.
Right, but I also think procedurally, you probably can't stand up and ask to undo the amendment that was just adopted. So that's why I think we need to have Secretary Blumer advise.
Well,
So I will go up and.
It does help them
You
over
brought all these
have to
problems
offer
over here?
their
Yeah,
amendment.
just for you. Pardon me?
You have
Yeah, they
to
want
offer
to go
their
with it.
amendment.
Yeah, we do. We voted to do it.
they
Otherwise,
already did it.
the OPR can't put in place a certification program for doulas without support.
Well,
And so we feel very strongly
well, we
about,
want you to get the money.
Yeah,
This
I
is
know.
just a
Okay.
matter of,
So-
we're gonna keep track it and appropriate it in the big bill.
Jack's
right.
gonna see if Bloomer can come down.
Oh, good. And you know what? I'm just gonna run, I wanna get my folder because I've got 36 and 21, 26 and 53 over.
Okay.